Hey, what's up guys? JB here. Welcome back to Future Look. And this week we're going to be going over an all-new seasonal unit from the JP side, and that is going to be Valentine's Miranda. Now, as has become standard here on Global, the Valentine's holiday is not one that Gumi actually acknowledges here in our game, but instead they do go for that Lunar New Year celebration event. And as we've seen kind of in previous years, with these Valentine's units from JP, they have been added into our permanent pool along that standard 4-month timeline where we get the normal release. So in that case, we would be looking at Miranda, here in Global sometime in mid to late June. Now, this is the second light unit to be added into the game in relatively short succession. She will be joining 100 cost Winged Stern, who we did look at here recently on the channel. And that is after having somewhat of a unit drought for the light element in 2022. Of course, we did get Sylvie here in Global, but other than that, there really wasn't all that much. So, what is this newest unit going to be bringing to the table here for the light element? Well, let's deep dive into the kit and let's see what she's going to be all about. So Valentine's Miranda is a 70 cost light unit. She has base 3-1 movement and she can wear hats and cloth. And Miranda is now the 4th 70 cost unit to join the light element, and she will be alongside Engelbert, Macherie, and Sakura, all from early on in the game. Now, looking at her TMR, first and foremost, the thing that I'm probably most excited about with this item is that it is a 4 agility TMR. And I do believe this is our first 4 agility TMR accessory, and accessory being the key word there, as that means that anyone will be able to wear it. So just for that alone, I am actually pretty excited for this item, just for the agility tuning possibilities. There has actually been a number of times where I have needed exactly 4 agility to sort of set up certain plays, and I didn't actually want to resort to using agility trust stones in order to get there and sort of sacrifice in other areas of my build. Now, the effect itself, I'm kind of whatever on. It seems like it is designed with Miranda herself in mind here. Now, personally, I am not sure that I would really ever use this one on Miranda, but perhaps if you were trying to do something specific there with the hate manipulation. Now, moving down into the stat overview, and we are looking at very average numbers here for Miranda, really just across the board. Her base HP is probably the best highlight for her here. It's decent, I think, for a magic type unit like this. Her magic and dex values, not too shabby either, coming in just above the UR average. Now shifting over to her luck and agility. The agility is just above average at 66 innate. I would like it to be a little bit higher, but that's decent enough. The base luck value of 170 here, that's okay too. But, when we actually look at the board and the other boosts she's getting there, it's not really much of anything. So she is coming in at 217 innate luck, which is down amongst some of the lowest in the game. Now, of course, that is going to directly impact her accuracy and crit evade numbers, and they are going to suffer there as a result as well. Now, looking at the mastery ability, 10% slash res penetration, always going to be welcome on any slash base unit. She does get 30% acquired AP as well. Now, as we saw in the base stats, Miranda is a magic-based unit. So this effect is not something that we generally see on those kind of units, but Miranda is one of the rare magic-based ones that doesn't start with a stocked AP pool right from the start of either that 50% or 75% as we see with other mages. But instead, she is more in the Blade Soul vein and will be starting at that 18% mark, similar to what we're used to with physical-based units. So AP definitely is something that you will need to be cognizant of when you are using Miranda. Now defensively, we do have 6 base defense and 0 spirits, nothing to write home about there. The resistances though are in better shape. We have positive resistance here to slash, strike, and missile, with the latter of those both coming in at 20%. Now the concerning part here is that magic resistance. She is just neutral there to go along with that 0 spirit we just looked at. And we do have a -10 to pierce resistance, which is going to be her main weakness. Now for ailment resistances, we do have 50% here to frostbite and to slow, as well as a 10% to toad. And considering her AP situation, I do actually like that frostbite resistance. The slow, I like it, it's fine enough. It's a decent one to have, just not something that we see, super common within the meta, at least right now. Toad, I think, you're still going to be wanting to run a trust stone if you are super worried about it. 10% isn't enough quite to fully, null that one out. All right, so a quick look at the Transcendence upgrades for Miranda, and she's going to be tagged as a magical attacker, no surprise there. So she's going to have the standard set of stats available to her here in her reincarnation. Of course, that is going to be heavily weighted on magic attack value at that 180 mark, if you are able to fully max that one out. Now for the 140 mastery, she is going to be getting some more resistances here. 10% to slash is going to put her at 20% innate. And then she's going to be getting another 10% to strike, which puts her at 30% base, which is pretty crazy. And is definitely going to set her up as a nice potential counter against those fist-based teams that we've been hearing about as of late. So there has been a noticeable influx of units recently that do carry a positive strike resistance, sort of post-strike meta, as I'll call it, after, really not seeing that very often in the game for the better part of 3 years. So definitely a very interesting development there. Now, aside from that, she is getting 10% to Magical Human Killer here. That's pretty good. It's just going to be increasing her damage just a little bit. And then one of her attacks is going to be getting a skill upgrade. It's her Job 12 ability. And that skill is going to be getting a 35% modifier increase. So that part of it, I'd say, is just a little bit underwhelming. A lot of units coming in where they've been getting kind of more interesting enhancements to their skills other than just pure damage. Overall, though, I'd say this mastery ability is fine. We have to remember that Miranda is just a 70 cost unit. I really don't want it to be overpowered, so I think that this is a fine place to be. Personally, I don't really want another Halloween Lucia situation. I think that was a big mistake in the game as far as I'm concerned. She came in as a 70 cost unit, and for all intensive purposes, she has been, 90 to 100 cost caliber. I think that is a pretty big balance problem, especially when you are considering cost restricted modes in more of the visions. All right, moving on to passive abilities and counters, and unlike some other units we've recently previewed, I really don't think that there's a ton of build flexibility here with Miranda. For one, she is always going to want to have this passive number 2 equipped. It's her only source of spirit penetration in her kit. And then I think that in most cases, you're probably going to want to pair that with option 1. I think if you don't, you're going to find that she really runs into a lot of AP issues. As we talked about, just starting out with 18% of her starting AP pool at the beginning of battle. Now, if you were able to address that AP issue via other means, maybe you could opt for another passive there. Maybe going for kind of an anti-dark team, you could look at option number 3, and then maybe even option number 5 for some HP bulk and additional magic value. Now, looking at Miranda's counters, I think this is where things get a lot more interesting for this unit. 2 very strong counters I'm highlighting here. She does get an all-new unique counter from her main job, and I think it's really quite an amazing one. And if there hadn't been so much counter block skills and vision cards and etc. that had been added into the game as of late, this counter I think would be absolutely broken. And that's because this one has a 100% chance of triggering if one condition is met, and that is that missile damage is hitting her. And if that happens, she will be able to reduce that damage by 50%. So, obviously when this applies, it is amazingly strong. Assuming that no counter block is present on the enemy, this is essentially a 50% missile damage barrier that is always going to be on her. So considering this skill here with the base missile and strike resistance that we looked at, it does seem that Miranda has been kind of designed as more or less a direct counter to some of those ice missile teams that we see currently. But in general against, missile teams, I think that she will be very, very strong. Now, if you did want something a bit more general purpose, maybe you weren't running her against any missile teams, she does have access to Grimoire Keeper as a sub-job. So she does have Halloween Lucia's counter ability here as well. And that one, I think, is also a very nice one. Just a 30% chance to go off on this one, but when it does, she does get 40 area resist buff, in addition to that hate down, which can be very nice for autoplay. So, while I didn't see much build flexibility here from Miranda in the passive abilities, I do actually think she has some nice options here in the counters. So, definitely a feather in her cap. All right, let's take a look at Miranda's all new main job kit, and let's start off with her buffs. She does have 3 of them here in the main kit, and 3 very nice ones at that. Now, buff 1 is going to be giving her shell as well as 25% magic resist. This is definitely going to go a long way in addressing that magical weakness that we saw there in the base stats, so I do like this one here quite a bit. Now, buff number 2 is her party buff, and this is going to give 20% agility as well as 40% magic to herself and her allies, and then is also adding a 35% physical barrier to herself. Now, if you are able to combo together these first two buffs, very nice flexibility there, in terms of your overall mitigation with both of those online. Now, last but not least here, we do have her third buff, and this one is going to give her re-raise. And while that re-raise is active, it is giving her 15 area resist. So definitely another very nice buff here. It is just a little bit tough though at the same time because, even if you did run Miranda alongside a tank, there just have been several area of effect re-raise dispels added into the game as of late, most notably with Sephiroth and Wing Stern, although here in Global we do have Sylvie who brings that as well. So even despite that though, very nice options here in terms of survivability here across these three buffs. In terms of autoplay though, she's definitely not going to be able to get all of these online. Generally, we have time to get one, maybe two buffs off in battle. So depending on the matchups that you're anticipating, you may need to switch some things off here to get your setup optimal just the way that you like it. And in terms of the AI priority, at least from what I've seen on the JP side, it does seem that the shell buff there is the third priority there in the list. Now shifting over to Miranda's attack skills next, skill 1 is her low AP finisher attack. It's a straight line, range 5 with a range height of 1. It does come in with the standard low 121% mod. This one has a single effect on it and it's going to give a boost to her magical damage of 15% after it hits the target. And that is a flat damage increase, so definitely a very nice buff here if you are able to get that off in the mid fight and sort of boost up your potential there as the fight is wearing on. Now skill number 2 is a range 4 with a +1 on the cross AoE. It has a range height of 1 with an additional there on the area of effect. It is a medium 165% mod and it is a 2-hit slash attack. Now this skill does have two effects pre-damage. First it's going to break magic barriers, and then it's going to increase her slash res penetration by 40% for 3 turns. So definitely a nice skill here for Miranda's damage potential. This would put her at a 50% slash res penetration, just between the mastery and this buff before we even consider gearing. Now this also is the only area of effect attack that we have here in the main kit, so definitely notable for that reason as well. Now finally, this is the skill that gets upgraded in Miranda's 140 form, and it does become a 200% modifier, so very strong overall attack here. Now Miranda's third skill here is a range 4 with a range height of 1. It's coming in again with that large 200% mod. And prior to the damage, it will dispel courage from your target. A mortal dispel is always great utility to have. Many of the meta units out there, do rely on that status for their survival condition. Now the light element in particular, they don't really have very many units at all who can deal with courage, so this is definitely going to be a boon for the elements. And it does also make her a pretty good partner, good synergy with either the new Wing Stern units or with Sylvie, both who can deal with re-raise in a very large AoE. Now last up we do have Miranda's Limit Burst, a shorter range on this one, just coming in at a range 3 with a range height of 1. We do have the standard large 200% LB mod, and this attack before the damage comes in will break the target's spirit as well as the light resistance by 25%. So this attack is going to hit very, very hard here with that double break. It's definitely going to have the potential to one-shot many backline units out there. And if you were hitting maybe a tankier unit with this, it's definitely going to be able to set up your team for a very nice follow-up attack. So kind of summing everything up here for Miranda, a pretty nice survivability coming in the form of those buffs. She has ways to sort of increase her damage in the mid-fight actively with her attacks. She does have that AoE barrier removal and then the double break there on the limit burst. So, nice ways to help set up her team there as well. In terms of caveats, no counter reduction, no healing power down, no shell or re-raise removal. Obviously every unit is going to have gaps in their kit, but that is why we do have 3-man teams, so definitely look for that utility elsewhere in your party. Alright, so let's take a quick look at Miranda's sub-jobs. And starting with the main job sub, she is picking up 2 more attack skills here. So skill 1 is going to be a short range, just a range of 2 on this one, but it has kind of this T-shaped area effect, which is somewhat unique. It does have a low 121% mod, and it has a 25% chance to disable your targets. This one is okay. I don't think that we would see this one in auto in a lot of cases, maybe just in a sort of a low AP situation. So I think it is a pretty niche skill, but as always, maybe could be a little bit more interesting for manual control. Now the second skill here, I do like this one a little bit better. It's a range 3 with a large 200% mod, and it is a 2-hit slashing chain attack. So this skill here, her AI would definitely prioritize a bit more, and you definitely would see it from time to time in auto, specifically if she didn't need that Immortal Dispel from her Job 25 ability, because this skill, it's also single targeted, has the same modifier, but it does cost a lower AP. So this skill, it could be pretty decent, but outside of maybe some niche cases, I really wouldn't envision myself using this particular sub job all that much, because I think the other two choices are quite a bit more compelling. And that's because she does have the Grimoire Keeper and White Mage sub jobs. Grimoire Keeper, of course, being Halloween Lucia's main job. Both of these are going to be very useful for her, I think. Now, Grimoire Keeper specifically would give her access to attritional protection, which does give her that souped up protect buff, which comes along with that 50 defense debuff resistance, as well as adding that 20 AP removal to your attacks, which can be pretty nice. She does also get access to Archaic Healing, which is a pretty nice AoE heal, and then Swift End, which is a 185% mod large diamond AoE attack, and that actually reduces the defense pen of your opponents by 30. So certainly some nice skills here coming in from this sub job, and I think it will be the go-to one, if you're going to be looking to fight against, physical opponents or bruisers. All right, so the last job Miranda gets here is going to be White Mage, definitely one of the oldest jobs in the game, so I think most of us are pretty familiar with this one by now. However, I think there's a couple of main uses for this job. The first is you're going to want her to be a bit more supportive. Using a buff like Protector Shell can be a good way to hold her back on the back line because she does have an attack-focused AI. I do think in a lot of cases the main use for this job is going to be to give her access to that Holy Spell, which is a 220% mod guaranteed hit attack, which you can use to sort of cover your bases against evade opponents. As we saw there in the stats overview, Miranda is blind as a bat when it comes to her accuracy, so she can certainly get some use out of this one. So debuting along with Miranda is an all-new katana weapon. So yes, Miranda is going to be part of that katana job group, and with that job there really hasn't been all that many job-based vision cards that have come along quite yet. So I am going to be highlighting the magic version of this weapon here. Miranda is definitely pretty average when it comes to her crit rate, so you would really need to build that up pretty substantially in order to get it to a reliable place. I don't think it is really all that worth it in her case, so I do think the magic one is going to be the best one for her. Now the unconditional passive is 20% slash res penetration. We have seen that before on Asterisk Katana. However, there is no magic version of that item, so here we are. Now this one does have 3 conditional passives here just for Miranda. 30% reaction block, 15% reduced AP consumption. So along with that passive there that we looked at initially, that's going to put her at a 40% AP reduction. So that's definitely going to go a long way to sort of help address that AP concern that we looked at there initially. This one does have a 10% human killer as well, so it does give a little bit more potency to your attacks. So it's definitely a nice option here for Miranda. I'm not sure that it's going to see a ton of use outside of her. Maybe for a slash res option for Varouche. The only other magic katana user I can even think of besides him would be Raychess, but she does get her own weapon there from her selection quest. All right, flashing over to our timeline here for 2023. Here in Global, we just recently got Rugia, the Earth Warrior of the Crystal, and it does seem he may very well be our last unit here before we get into the 3rd anniversary time frame. Of course, barring any sort of global surprise here in the next couple of weeks. And for Miranda's release here in Global, we are anticipating she will be coming sometime in mid to late June, as we've sort of seen with other Valentine's units, in the past. Now, hopefully she does come in on that 18k Vizier banner, as we've seen with some of the other 70 cost units, thus far, but, anything can happen really at this point. Now, in terms of upcoming synergies with Miranda, look at none other than Winged Stern. They have actually paired pretty nicely over in JP. Of course, she is part of that katana, job group, and the only other katana unit here on the board is Sephiroth. Now, of course, it is a thing in JP now to be able to mix dark and light together, so that could be, one potential way to sort of bridge those two units. Miranda can also take advantage of Sephiroth's vision card. So they could potentially make a pretty interesting combo there. Of course, on the flip side, Sephiroth is probably the unit that Miranda is most worried about here, but I would add Yuffie to that list as well, just kind of considering some of the accuracy concerns that we went over here with Miranda. All right, so on to the next one, and here is a mock build that I put together for Miranda. And as I was sort of thinking about some of the things that she would naturally be strong against, I decided to make an anti-strike party today. Now, you could certainly lean into her natural strength against missile damage as well, but with all of the talk of fist comps over in JP, none of those units are going to be particularly strong against, her magic slashing and magic attack damage that she brings. So I did think it would be a pretty nice showcase, of what Miranda can potentially bring to the table here when she comes around. And this build is going to be a mono light team. As we did kind of touch on earlier, there really aren't all that many katana vision cards yet in the game, so I don't think it's really worth diving into, sort of the job-based synergies just quite yet with that particular group. And all of the units in this build today are going to be at 60% or higher natural strike resistance, with Miranda coming in at a whopping 72%. And as we know with strike damage, there's really not any source of substantial strike res penetration so far in the game, so that is one damage type that you can effectively shut down on damage type resistance alone. And if you are able to force those units into using their sub-job attacks, a lot of them do come in with slash-based jobs there and their subs, that's going to effectively kill quite a bit of the utility that's coming in on their main job kits as well. Now, as for this build, I'm going to pair her here with Lucio and Warrior of Light. Both of those units do start with positive strike resistance and do have 140 access here, at this time in JP. So those were sort of my two requirements here for the build. Now, I did play around a bit with Ma Cherie as well. Her 140 is not too bad. Maybe another potential combination there for a limited guild battle situation. I will say don't sleep on Lucio though. If we do follow JP, we're going to be able to completely max out his reincarnation by grinding out his missions. And he does have a very nice bravery debuff on his large diamond AoE attack. And that's going to really do a number on the damage of those fist-based units there as well. Now with Miranda, I would be using her on her Grimoire Keeper job so that she can even further lessen their damage by sort of debuffing their defense penetration there on top. So I do think with those factors combined, along with the barriers and natural strike resistance here, I do believe that this, should work very, very well. So let's take a look at the equipment here in the builds. We're going to be using that Candy Katana that we just looked at. I'm going to be using the Pod 153 for the combination of agility and unit resistance. Now, if you were never able to pick this one up, the Lightning Selection Quest item reward from Villeneuve is a very nice substitute. Now, adding to that, I do have Ma Cherie's TMR here as well. Something that you could maybe use in a second strike in a Guild War situation. Now, for the Esper, I'm going to be using Bahamut. This is an Esper that we've had for quite a while in the game. And he does have strike resistance on his board of 15% there. So in addition to those magical power-ups that we're going to be getting from that, we do get a nice defensive bonus there as well. Now for the main slot vision card, I'm going to be using Elena's VC. It does have the party effect of 20 strike resistance. Not something that we've been able to get a ton of mileage out of thus far in the game. But once all the pieces are aligned for those fist teams, I think that this one is going to be very valuable. Now our agility, single target resistance, and area resistance are going to be covered with two cards here with the two Bahamut vision cards. And then the remaining cards are just sort of grabbing some offensive bonuses and HP. So we're not really sacrificing, much offensive output here whatsoever, as we still do have some slash attack here, as well as slash attack resistance penetration there on top. For the Trust Stone setup, I am going to be going with the defense set here on the left side, and that was to push her defense there up above that 40 defense plateau. But not only that, to also enhance that healing potential there in round 2. I do think an HP set, could work just fine here as well. For passives here on the left, I'm going to be going with a combination of strike and slash resist. Again, most of those fist units do have slash-based sub-jobs, so I am trying to cover that there just a little bit. The second stone is going to have that HP and luck, pretty standard there. And then for the third stone, I went with some wind and water resistance. Commonly in those fist-based teams are going to be Perrine and Edward, so just trying to cover some of the elemental attacks that they can bring. Now for a more general use set, you can always go for sort of debuff resistance there, or just go for missile and magic damage to kind of have a more all-around set. However, this build here is going to have a much more narrow focus. Now shifting over to the right side, we are going for an agility set. Can't really go wrong with that in pretty much any situation. So here I'm just going to be filling in some offensive passives that weren't covered, on her weapon, but definitely trying to emphasize that magic attack there as well, so that she might be more prone to use that attack that does reduce the defense penetration of the opponents. So that is going to be the build, guys. Just kind of a fun anti-strike builds, but something that I think could actually be pretty effective, if we do see some of those teams floating around when Miranda is, coming to global. Now, obviously, by that time, we will have Winged Stern there as well, so he's definitely going to be a lot more powerful than Lucio. But I did just make a build recently that did highlight him, and it was very similar to this one. I did want to just kind of go a little bit direction here and highlight Lucio. So, if you are interested in taking a closer look at this build, as always, I will put a link to that in the description below. So what is my verdict today on Miranda? Now, starting with the pros, she has a very versatile mitigation options with access to protect and shell that includes magic resist, a physical barrier, and if all else fails, she does have that re-raise that does come along with that nice area resist. She is not all about the mitigation though. Her attack skills do come along with 4 to 5 range and access to large modifiers in both single target and area of effect versions. And not only that, she does have powerful attacks in both slashing magic and magic attacks to sort of round out her kit. Now, Miranda does have several nice utility options as well, including an area of effect magic barrier break, a light in peril, and she can even dispel a mortal spirit, which, to this point has been somewhat rare utility to find in the light element specifically. And while her starting AP is less than I would like, she does have access to a large amount of AP consumption reduction, which definitely will make her skills very cheap to use. Now, as we saw with the base mitigation and counter abilities that Miranda has, this is also a unit that you can roll out as a missile or strike specialist counterplay. And that counter ability in particular is very, very powerful. Just be wary of those units that do bring that counter reaction block. Now, as for my concerns with this unit, I do love that she does have access to those magic attacks and support skills, but unfortunately, she just doesn't have any innate way to sort of build up her cast speed innately. And unfortunately, the cast reduction that's included on trust stones and items only affect your offensive abilities, which does make many of those white mage support skills very difficult to use in PvP situations just because of the long casting cycles on them. And while Miranda does have access to a varied set of mitigation and defensive buffs, she is completely lacking when it does come to her spirit or pierce resistance, and that is going to be a bit more concerning as of late with units like Amnelis and Dialdo entering the game. I am just a little bit concerned, when it comes to Miranda's, damage type penetrations as well. Although she does have access to the standard 40 spirit penetration, she does lack when it comes to magic attack penetration. And then her slash res penetration is going to be tied into that active buff. So when she does get dispelled in the mid fight, that can potentially have a big impact on her damage. Now, my last concern, and probably the biggest among them, is just how incredibly inaccurate this unit is. With just 217 luck and no accuracy-based passives to fall back on, this unit has an innate 153 accuracy rating, which is among the worst in the entirety of War of the Visions. Now, that poor luck value does hurt her twofold, as her crit evasion there suffers as a result. So you will need to consider your opponents carefully, when using this unit. Now, she does have access to Holy with the White Mage subjob there that we talked about. However, the new meta for evasion is that they are just coming in with skills now that allow them to ignore sure hits, at least, for her first few turns in battle. At the end of the day though, Miranda is just a 70 cost unit, and as with others recently released at this level, she will hit well above that cost weight, which definitely makes her a very nice option for limited cost events. I think one of the interesting questions for us here in Global is, how is this unit going to fit in alongside Sylvie? Of course, Sylvie, is a much more dedicated support style unit, but she can be built in a way that where she is more offensive focused if you do shift, on and off certain skills. And she can do pretty good damage, when you do. So I think considering those things, I definitely don't view this as a must pull unit. Obviously Miranda does have her strengths, as did Winter Ravies a few months ago, but I don't think that this unit is going to be that next Halloween Lucia. And seeing as she'll most likely be part of our permanent pool, unless you're a light main, I think that most people can just sort of leave this one and hope for an off banner there in the future. So there is the review of Sweetheart Miranda. Just kind of taking a step back here, it is a little bit puzzling to me that they did give the light element another 70 cost unit, especially when elements like fire, water, and lightning, they don't have any 70 cost units today. And I would say water in particular, is very, very slim pickings, when it does come to low cost options. So I do hope that we see some course correction there, over the remainder here of 2023. Now, I've always been a big fan of Miranda in the game. I do love the water version of that character. And she was actually among one of the first units released on a banner in War of the Visions. And she is still a good unit to this day, which I know is quite amazing. So I gave you my opinion here today on this new light version, but I want to know what you guys are thinking. Are you going to be pulling for her, or are you sort of waiting to see what the next big thing is? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.